Live. Good morning. Welcome to the House Environment Committee. This morning, we are taking up S212, an act relating to potable water supply and wastewater system connections. And we welcome Chris Cochran to help us put this in context.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Chris Cochran. I'm the Director of Community Planning and Revitalization, and I work for the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm mostly here to be the historian. I think this bill passed before many of the members were involved, and just to give you a little context on kind of the why and how we got here. I'm not a wastewater engineer, technical specialist. The focus of our work is supporting kind of downtown and village center revitalization. And my interest came to this. I will try not to get into the weeds, but there is a provision called Priority Housing Projects that allowed an easier path for projects that are located in designated centers, so downtown to village centers, neighborhoods. So in exchange for providing affordable housing, there was a benefit, an Act 250 benefit for these projects. We were asked to do some research on kind of, is this regulatory incentive working? So we did some extensive outreach with stakeholders to answer the question. We talked to large and small developers. And what we learned from large developers was that, yes, the incentive is working. It is producing a lot of housing. But the frustration that we heard from them consistently was that there was a lot of trouble that they were seeing with their approval of their connection permits, water and wastewater connection permits. It was important, to them to raise this because I won't go into too much Act 250, but you need all your state level permits before you can apply to Act 250. And there were significant delays on getting these connection permits, and the projects couldn't go forward until every permit was approved. That issue has been raised and it's been flagged, and Brian can tell you more about it. Permits are timely now. But as part of this conversation, we also talked to a lot of small scale developers. So somebody who wanted to build an accessory dwelling unit, somebody who wanted to take a larger house that they had, that they were not using the extra rooms and create a duplex or a smaller unit within their building. That triggered a requirement for them to get, an expanded water connection permit in many jurisdictions. I think what was disheartening to them, these people were trying to proactively solve our housing crisis. The first thing that they've heard was, well, you're going to have to hire an engineer. You're going to have to get a new connection designed. You're going to have to go through a local permitting process, and you're going to have to go through a state permitting process just to get the connection. So their idea was quashed by this wall of requirements and cost that you needed to do the right thing, to build a unit within a building that you already had. You'd like to maybe earn some additional income, create a housing unit for somebody. So that all experience and background led to a Senate bill called S1, I think from 2022. I'm sorry, got my numbers wrong. It passed the Senate, came to this committee. This committee took testimony, and it got very confusing. There was a lot of people coming in on different sides of the issue and kind of the benefits of the state's regulatory review versus the discretion of the local communities. So ultimately, this committee chose to kick it out to report. So a working group was created, led by ANR, and a pretty good group of stakeholders came together, I think 2 summers ago, to figure out a better solution to this tiered permitting system to allow higher capacity communities with the technical expertise to have true delegated authority. The state would maintain its authority where important, and Brian can tell you more about that, but it was generally agreed that this was an easier pathway to saying yes without compromising any of our environmental quality goals or regulations. Again, Brian will tell you more about the technical aspects, just kind of to let you know that you hear a lot about, permitting being the problem for housing. Housing is a complicated issue. There's financial issues, there's labor issues, there's mortgage rate issues, there's available land issues, there's a lack of infrastructure issues. This one permit correction improvement process alone is not going to solve our housing crisis, but it's a step in the right direction, and it will make things a little bit better, particularly in these communities that have higher capacity. Kind of getting into the bill and the structure of our existing, double permitting. Again, you have to get a local permit, then you have to get a state permit. to approve this connection. It's by design, this was done by intent. And what we found in our working group is it's just not working very well. And there's opportunities to make it better. ANR does have the ability right now to delegate permitting authority to municipalities. In effect, it hasn't really worked. I think only 2 communities, I think Colchester and Charlotte, took up this delegation authorities. They found it to be too burdensome. The work involved, or the requirements that came with delegation were just not worth the benefit they see. So they ultimately turned back delegated authority because it was just this bill recommends just a kind of a targeted general permit approach. So communities that meet ANR's requirements would be allowed to review these connections. State oversight would remain. Public health and environmental protection do remain the priority. I think there's a reasonable amount of process improvement with state oversight, checks and balances in there. A little bit outside of the jurisdiction of this bill, but I mentioned it in the Senate, so I'm going to mention it here. The state's water, wastewater, in-ground disposal rules are very old, and I think they shape a lot of our policy. And they stand to be updated. I think it would help improve a lot of process and provide some clarity, especially in areas where we're trying to build housing in and around our centers, if these rules were modernized. I don't know when the last time they looked at them, but one of the discussions is a lot of work. I understand the reluctance to do them, but I think it's time. And finally, a point I want to make is, capacity is the real challenge, and nobody can answer the question about where capacity exists. ANR does monitor capacity at the treatment plant. Municipalities do have a sense of what their capacity is in their sewer and water system, but there's not clarity on what the definition of capacity is. And there's not clarity on where we have sewer and water infrastructure statewide. And these are critical bits of information, data points to help us understand where housing can be developed, where there's constraints, and where we need to make significant investments. And again, it's outside the scope of this report, but I'm just flagging it. It's like, if we really want to solve our housing challenge, the right place to build housing is where we've invested in sewer water capacity. If we don't even know where the capacity exists, it's really hard for us to create the housing in the areas that are ready to accept and receive that housing. UVM has done some great work recently, kind of gathering a lot of municipal data on where sewer and water pipes exist. They have grabbed data from ANR to kind of build a better map, but responsibility relies with nobody to really map this. UVM kind of jumped into this space because nobody was really doing it. So again, outside the scope of this report, but it's something that we really need to tackle as a state. Because if you can build in areas that have existing sewer and water, it's much cheaper, and cost is a real issue. If a new home costs $600,000, most people can't afford that. So if we can know where our capacity exists, even at the high level, red, yellow, I think that would be a helpful indicator. I think that's all I want to say. I'm happy to answer any kind of high level questions, but you've got a technical expert here from ANR, and he can give you the level of detail you probably need next.
Great. Do members have questions? Representative Tagliavia.
So do I understand you in what you said was that we should be looking only to be building where there is
No.
wastewater?
No, I'm saying, we need solutions in every part of the state. Absolutely. There's 2 parts to that question. Our in-ground disposal rules, so for septic systems, are complicated. And I think if you wanted to make it easier and clearer for people to develop in rural areas where these in-ground disposal systems are needed, I think there's opportunities to improve that process and make it more predictable and more affordable. In communities that have sewer and water systems, the state has made a huge investment. The federal government has made a huge investment in this infrastructure. And in many cases, it's not being tapped because we don't know where it's allowed. And the only point I'm trying to make in that is we've made this investment. We're not maximizing our return on it. If we can make more connections to these areas, these systems that often struggle because they're not self-sufficient to pay for their own sustainability, their improvements, we're getting more value out of the investment that we have already made. We can get a house in these areas usually cheaper because building a septic system and drilling a well has gotten really, really expensive. And although there's costs in creating and designing a new connection, it's easier. And the goal is, again, affordability of this house. You know, if you have all these infrastructure costs and you have this existing infrastructure that's being unused, we need to tap into it.
Just also want to add, you said state, federal funding and local.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who have these systems have made them happen.
Yeah, and it's the biggest asset they have. You know, this is the biggest, most expensive thing that they own. They're very careful with it as a consequence and how they make connections to it. So I think, but I think we're just not maximizing our investment and stepping back from, again, the work that I do for ACCD is all about, you know, land use and smart growth. And these areas, you know, it does make sense to concentrate growth in areas where you have existing infrastructure because it supports a larger state land use goal and it also supports broader economic development. If you live closer to where you work, your community is more vital. You're spending less time in your car commuting. I think there's a lot of other ancillary benefits to ensuring we're maximizing the investments we've already made. So sorry, that was a really long answer, but
Well, if I can follow
Yeah.
on, you brought up smart growth.
Mhm.
Is it smart for me if I want to live in a rural area to build in a rural area if I decide it's best for me?
It's your decision. It's your land. It's whatever you want to do. I live in a rural area. I commute to Montpelier. It's my choice. Nobody's taking away your ability to choose and develop in your own land. What I'm saying is we've made investments in areas that have sewer and water, roads, infrastructure, buildings for hundreds of years. And if we're trying to solve our housing crisis, adding more housing there may be more cost effective than building in a rural community. I live in an old village center. I live in an old village store. Sorry. The cost for me to improve my barn were significant. You know, the cost to expand my sewer and water system were significant. It's just, you know, it's just a reality. We all have our choices, and choices come with benefits and costs.
Representative Austin.
So I assume the answer to this is yes, but I'm assuming there's like a mapping of soils
Mhm.
across the
Absolutely,
state
yeah.
where where you
Mhm.
put septic.
Yep.
And alternative septic.
Yeah, it's outside of Brian can probably tell you more
Right.
about it, or he's got people. There is a statewide map of soil suitability, but it's just a general indicator,
Mhm.
and you have to do actually on the test pits to figure out if it does actually perk. But it's just a general characterization of soil types. It's a starting off point, but it's not going to tell you you can absolutely put a septic system here. You can put a septic system about anywhere. It's just at what cost.
Hmm.
I respectfully remind members that we're talking about S212 and escalating potable water supply and wastewater system connections. If we could stay on topic, that would be great. Representative Norris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony. I apologize for being a few minutes late. Very interested to understand you talked about capacity.
Mhm.
We have current data that indicates where we do have capacity, because what I keep hearing from a lot of towns is we're already over capacity.
I mean, it's a better question for Brian, but it depends what you mean by capacity. Is it the capacity of the pipes? Is it the capacity of the treatment plants? Is it capacity to have new houses? Yeah, treatment plants, there's good data on it. They know what comes in and what goes out. But it's only one part of the puzzle.
Yes.
And unless you have that other part of the equation solved, it's really hard to know. You know, just because your plant has capacity and you have an available site, it doesn't mean that, you know, that pipe's too skinny. And without major infrastructure upgrades along the road, can you make a new connection? You know, so, and that's what I'm trying to get at is we really need to define what capacity is to provide us meaningful information about where development can occur.
I think it might be a good time to segue to the Agency of Natural
I
Resources.
would love to get out of this seat.
Can answer the technical questions.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me in. Oh, yeah. I should include, we support this bill. You know, it is a good incremental step in the right direction. Incremental steps are meaningful steps. You know, would we do more if we could?
Yeah.
Absolutely. But this is a movement. Thank you.
Welcome, Brian.
What was the flow, Brian? Sorry.
There's the joke. Morning. For the record, my name is Brian Redmond. I'm the Director for the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division at the Agency of Natural Resources. Also with me today is the Program Manager, Bruce Douglas, and maybe you can
Hello.
introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Bruce Douglas, wastewater program manager in the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division.
And Bruce is going to offer the technical expertise for questions from the committee. Thank you for the invitation to come and testify on S212, a bill that the Agency of Natural Resources supports. It's okay with you, Chair Sheldon. I'd like to touch on a bit of the history. Just did already do that, leading us up to today. Identify a couple key components of the bill from the agency's perspective, and then leave some time for questions. Okay, starting off with a brief history, this topic has long been debated in the legislature, going back probably almost a decade and possibly even longer. But I'm going to fast forward and focus us more on modern history and starting in 2023 with the passage of the Home Act. The Home Act, as Chris has already mentioned, required ANR to establish a stakeholder group comprised of representatives from municipal public works, engineering consultants that are active in the practice, environmental groups, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and the Department of Housing and Community Development. The stakeholder group was led by myself and Bruce, as well as several other staff from ANR. The charge of this group was really to evaluate the connection permitting process, specifically identifying any of the areas of redundancy with the stated goal of reducing administrative burden and cost. The outcomes from the stakeholder group were included in the administration's housing bill last session, but ultimately the connection language did not receive testimony and did not make it through the process. What did make it through the process was an appropriation of $50,000 to develop a design manual for water and wastewater connections, which you will see referenced within S212. Following last session, ANR continued to look at the options to move the connection permitting process forward. The approach embodied in S212 represents this work and some of the key principles from our stakeholder engagement process, most namely improving connection-related technical information, ensuring transparent and consistent data and records management, and including and improving pathways for municipal review, while using the stated goals of reducing administrative burden and cost for applicants as a guide to this work. I understand the committee's received a walkthrough of this bill already. Okay, great. So I'd like to touch on a few key components, if I may. The first and really the heart and the core of this bill is the General Permit Authority under Chapter 64. This is on page 4 of the bill, starting on line 12 for those that are looking at it. This is really the core and the heart of this bill from our perspective, and it provides the directive to the agency to issue general permits for connections. Functionally, this will shift connection permits from receiving individual review and individual permits to receiving coverage under a general permit with individual authorizations based on the certification provided by the licensed designer or the engineer. The licensed professional will be certifying the project meets the technical standards and the requirements of the rules and the conditions of the general permit. Vital to this framework is the development of the guidance manual for water and wastewater connections. This is the work supported by the $50,000 appropriation mentioned above. This guidance is important to improve the clarity and accessibility of standards and requirements related to connections and is a critical resource to support the general permit framework. To give the committee a sense of scale in terms of the volume of these permits, on average, the program is issuing approximately 225 connection permits on an annual basis, while the total program volume averages 3,000 permits a year. That volume in the single program is larger than all the permit volume of all of DEC's permitting programs combined. So it's a very high volume program that time is of essence and of priority for the program.
So just to move in on those numbers a little bit. The permits for connection is 225, 3,000 is sort of including all wastewater permits.
Yes, on-site wastewater systems, septic systems, less than 6,500 gallons, and private drinking water, wells, supplies.
Private drinking water. Okay,
That's the full scope of
public drinking water being permitted locally.
public drinking water being permitted through under the Safe Drinking Water Act and state and federal regulations. I believe you heard from Ben Montross and Sila Larson from my team last week. He's the program manager for the public drinking water system.
So that's, but these 3,000 permits they don't know.
Not those. Yeah, so it's a little awkward because it's really the heart of the program is the septic system regulations. And then on that is the connections as well as potable, what we call potable water supply. So anything that's non-public.
Very helpful. Yes, Representative Pritchard.
Thank you. So the permit, let me understand. The 3,000 permits, is that all the permits or is that all the permits for 6,500 gallons less?
That's all the permits approved or chapter 1 of the environmental protection rules. So we're talking about the first environmental protection rules to be enabled in the state dating back into maybe the 60s or the 70s as public health and subdivision, right?
Here, we heard the cholera story last week.
Yeah, so it's very foundational. So they're all the permits that are issued under this chapter, which is chapter 64 in Title 10. So it's septic system permits. It's up to 6,500 gallons. Once they hit that threshold, they transition into what's called our indirect discharge program, large capacity septic systems. So those are ski areas, often municipal infrastructure, municipal wastewater infrastructure. That's not a direct discharge, it's an indirect discharge. So that program is focused on those.
Okay, thank you.
We view this shift to a general permit framework important from the perspective of program sustainability and prioritization of resources. But we also see this shift as really important to improving outcomes by bringing that technical information forward and improving it. And also possibly shifting our resources a little bit more out of the middle of the permit process to the front of the permit process and the back of the permit process. And as Chris stated already, this is all under the guise of improving permit processes to enable housing in the state. The bill also establishes broader general permit authority for other activities permitted under Chapter 64. For an activity under the current language, for an activity to qualify for a general permit, the secretary must determine that the activity is considered low risk, low impact, and low complexity. We don't have any specific proposals for additional general permits at this time. For any new general permit that we would issue, the public would receive the opportunity for review and comment under Title 10, Chapter 170, the Environmental Notice Bulletin. As a matter of practice, the program will also engage stakeholders in the development of any general permit that we would issue, just to get that engagement and to improve the ultimate product that we put out. The second area of focus in the bill that I'd like to highlight is the municipal delegation for connection permitting. Currently, state law and regulations allow for both what's considered full delegation and partial delegation to municipalities for water supply and wastewater permitting. Full delegation allows a municipality to implement the full scope of the wastewater system and potable water supply rules, which I just described, which includes on-site wastewater systems, septic systems, and the water supplies. There have been 2 communities in the history of the program to receive full delegation. That's Colchester and Charlotte, and both have returned the programs to ANR. S212 repeals the option for full delegation, and the agency supports that repeal. With respect to partial delegation, Section 4 of the bill provides replacement language that allows ANR to delegate connection permitting authority to municipalities. The option for partial delegation and the associated requirements are consistent with the finding of the stakeholder groups. The stakeholder group on the connections process. To date, no community in Vermont has been granted partial delegation under the current program. While we don't expect many municipalities to avail themselves of this program, the new partial delegation program will address some of the historical impediments. And we would expect some interest in the program from a limited number of municipalities, and we are supportive of creating that pathway for local entities that have the expertise and the desire to do this work on behalf of the state. On page 9, line 13, you'll see an administrative processing fee. One of the unique and important aspects of these permits is they, quote, run with the land. It's critically important to the program that the data and records management associated with these permits are, 1, consistent on a statewide basis, and 2, publicly accessible online. The program receives a lot of inquiries from real estate agents and title attorneys regarding these permits, and it's very important for us to keep this process consistent, accessible, and optimized.
So can I just ask where the $100 fee comes from? Sounds like a nice round number. What's the basis for it?
There's work associated at the agency with managing the records and the data. So it's an estimate that we used to keep it as not an impediment to a municipality wanting to do this work, but also recognizing that this will require work and maintenance from the agency. It's storage of the information, it's receipt of the information, it's posting of the information. Really, since the pandemic, we're essentially 100% electronic operation in terms of getting the documents into the agency and then transmitting that information into our data management systems along with payment. So the lift isn't significant, but it's in recognition that it's not nothing.
How much of a how much staffing would it require? I mean, I know you don't know who's gonna sign up for this, but the bigger towns, I assume, are the first to do it.
Yeah, so the historical issues that Chris spoke about were in the city of Rutland. I don't know if they have interest in taking on this program. Obviously, it's the second largest city in the state. So that would, that would be a number of connections. The city of Burlington, I think you're hearing from Megan later today. In South Burlington, there is some interest out there. Our goal in setting this program up would be to make that as easy and as efficient as possible. We use something called A&R Online, and it's a mechanism to pull the data in across and then map it to our database so we can manage it and post that information online. All of our permit information is publicly available. So real estate agents and title attorneys, it's in the land record, or it should be, but they go to our website. And we just want to make sure that we keep that process consistent and optimized. Otherwise, it could get very burdensome. Okay, the third and final area of focus is on the revised fee schedule. Section 5 of the bill establishes a new fee structure for the general permits for connections. The fee structure is tiered in a similar manner to our existing fee structure based on the design flow of the project, with larger projects receiving higher flows and paying a higher fee. We consolidated the flow categories from 5 to 3 and have reduced the amount an applicant will pay when compared to the existing fee schedule. Based on our current data, we are projecting a revenue loss between $80,000 to $100,000 associated with the new fee schedule, but we expect this to be mitigated by the exemptions that we're repealing in Section 6 of the bill. These are exemptions related to connections that exist today, and we're proposing to repeal those so all connection permits go through the same exact process through the general permit process, making that data accessible, transparent, all the things I've already described. We also feel that anytime we will change a requirement, there will be a significant concentration on outreach to the regulated community and the Vermont public. And we would expect some increased permit volume. So we do think that this number will be mitigated further. That's just based on our current data and feel that it's manageable for us. I think that is what I wanted to say, but happy to try to answer any questions.
North
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this. This is a bit of a detailed question, but one of the things I've always appreciated A&R has done through the water permitting process is having delegated authority to certified engineers to do the work on the outside rather than keeping all the engineers in-house. But I did notice some language, and I want to make sure that that's not degrading. But I did notice some language on page 4, line 14, which uses the word may rather than shall in terms of delegating delegated preference to certified engineers. Are we backing off from that, or why the word may there? Whereas other places, page 7, line 3, still say shall. So,
Great question. Two parts. The first, in what we spoke about in the Senate process, was not all connection projects are created equal. There's a big difference between a multi-unit mixed development, not saying that it wouldn't qualify for a general permit, an individual house to a large development at a ski area. So the amount of infrastructure and the size of the connection could vary. So this is in recognition that there may be projects that through the process of grading that the general permit would not qualify. And that would be done through the general permitting process. Our intent is to have most, if not all of these, go through the general permitting process from a purely internal standpoint. And what I spoke about a lot on the Senate is I think about peeling a carrot. This time of year, starting now, the program is consumed. And the volume is not sustainable. So this is a peel off the carrot to try to make the workload more sustainable. So our intent is definitely to facilitate most, if not all. There just may be a class of projects in our review that wouldn't be appropriate and would necessitate individual review. The second piece to that is there will be an audit process involved with this to make sure that we're getting the outcomes that the program is designed to try to achieve, make sure the accountability is there. So some level of shifting of resources will be to the back end, and oftentimes the best way to do the audit is to actually conduct an individual review. So I see that language as helping in that realm from an implementation standpoint.
So the may is really more around may grant the general permit as opposed to may accept the approval from a certified engineer. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say, or?
There may be a class of connection projects. There may be a class. We haven't done the analysis yet where they don't qualify. We've determined that the infrastructure required for that connection really should go through an individual. It's significant. We should do an individual review of it. I don't know. We haven't done the work yet.
But the intent is to still continue using strongly the delegated certified engineer.
Our intent is to make this as fast and efficient as possible by pulling the information and technical documentation forward to make it easier to understand what a connection is, and then rely on the certification of the engineer. We'll have our general permit conditions and essentially a push button permit, if you will. And then on the back end, looking at audit procedures to make sure that they're meeting the requirements.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Edmund? Oh, I feel like we're missing an opportunity here.
Different topic, kind of getting back to the question I asked earlier about capacity and the data that we do have about capacity around the state. What data does AR have about various water systems around the state and their capacity to take on more? I mean, specifically, I represent the Virgins area. There's some significant, in fact, maybe the first chip project going into Virgins, 74 units right in Virgins. And one of the main things I'm worried about there is that the Virgins Canton water system, the potable water system, and the Virgins sewage treatment facility are both at like maximum capacity, and yet we're adding more housing right in Virgins. What data do we have that? And how does the state get involved when there are projects like that going on, and to say, oh, yeah, this is a good idea, or no, that's not, we need to significantly upgrade the water treatment facility here, for example, before we even think about building 74 more units.
Yeah, On the drinking water side of things, the public drinking water operating permits authorized under Chapter 56, Safe Drinking Water Act, state delegated authority to implement those requirements. We have primacy over Safe Drinking Water Act. Those permits do a very good job outlining the source capacity, the treatment capacity, the storage capacity. So those from a facility level are relatively detailed and known. For wastewater, direct discharge, not out of my shop, but those permits under the NIPD's direct discharge, as Chris stated, have really focused in on the treatment plant's capacity. One of the big findings from our stakeholder group is this, what it means to have capacity and what it means not to have capacity means different things to different people. So what you'll see in this bill, on page 4, line 18 is the language regarding the manual. And this is in working and leading the stakeholder group and working on this issue. This is a positive step forward. Our intent is to really focus in on and part of our RFP will be to help provide guidance to the consulting engineer, to the municipality to evaluate if they do have capacity for that connection. Our current connection permits require confirmation that there is capacity to serve. So it's not like it's unregulated now, but it needs a lift. And this is what we're trying to do here.
I need you to say that again. So you're saying like the NIPD's permit for the wastewater facility itself is not through your shop. I get that. But that you have different ways of understanding capacity between the two programs. And yet we are still adding significant numbers of units in the case of the example given. And how are we addressing the disconnect about capacity? The disconnect.
Pun intended.
Perhaps a pun intended.
So there's endless amounts of wastewater jokes.
Yes.
And an emoji.
We don't want that.
Our connection permits do require confirmation that capacity exists to serve the intended use. And we are relying on the certification through our application process currently.
That is certified through the city of Virgins or through your own sister department?
It would be certified by the applicant and their consultant engineer.
By the applicant, not the wastewater treatment operator or responsible.
Sorry.
You may.
Thank you. Bruce Douglas again. We do require a letter from the municipal, whether it's a select board or sewer commission, saying they have adequate capacity to serve this. We call it an allocation letter, and they allocate that much flow. It does vary from community to community how detailed their records are and whether they're keeping track or they estimating capacity, but we rely upon those officials who are responsible for the ownership of the wastewater treatment plant to say they can allocate that capacity, specific capacity for the project question.
How will this new work improve that relationship?
Yeah, what we're going to be asking, and I put a pause on the RFP until this conversation happens. But what we're asking for right now is an assessment of treatment capacity, hydraulic capacity, organic capacity, and wastewater context. We're looking at the collection system. We're looking at the water distribution system. So it's going to be a more comprehensive look at identifying what limitations may exist in the system and provide that information to owners, documenting the things that they need to be looking at before they're signing on to new connections.
So this is your example of the front end and the beginning and the end versus kind of managing the middle.
Yeah, I see this doc in the connections permit process. I see this documentation as being really vital to the general permit framework. If you start looking at other types of general permits, that's more where I'm talking about shifting our resources for things that are low complexity, low risk, low impact, shifting those resources out to do more pre-application assistance and training with the regulated community and the consulting community, and on the back end with auditing those projects versus in the middle where we're devoting all of our resources to getting those permits out and reviewing consultants' work one by one, individually issuing individual permits. That's the shift I'm talking about, and that's a longer term goal for things that are lower complexity. I do feel that that can yield better outcomes, and this is all around getting better outcomes.
Representative Austin.
For the delegation of authority from the state to a municipality, is there any funding available to the municipality for that position?
I believe the answer to that is probably no. But I'm not 100. I should get back to you on that. My gut reaction would be probably not for their administrative overhead.
So the municipality would be responsible for that.
Right, and they would be charging a fee for their work, presumably. This bill obligates them to the general permit framework, but the fee structure would be municipal by municipal. So they presumably would be charging for their services. What we found out in some of the communities that we did full delegation is it wasn't cost competitive with the services the state could provide. And that was one of the primary reasons why it was turned back to the state.
Members have further questions?
Can I say something about that?
You may.
I was gonna say how grateful I am. Different departments in the state are now permitting, I don't know if it's using AI or they're making the permitting process much easier, I think, for consumers. And I just want to, acknowledge that and say how grateful I am that you're moving in that direction.
We have a few efforts at DEC really focused on improving the permitting process, looking at it more holistically, doing a little silo busting. So
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Representative.
Also, another thing, and thank you for kind of leading the charge on the whole certified engineer mechanism and the delegating to third parties to do the work. And I'm really hoping that some of your patrons in wetlands and stormwater will begin to consider the same.
All right. Thanks for joining us and thanks for your work on this. All right, Thomas Weiss, you are here and we're a little early, but we'll invite you up now.
Might get even earlier when I'm done.
Great, we like that.
Good morning. I am Thomas Weiss, and thank you for inviting me here to talk to you this morning. I am a resident of Montpelier and a civil engineer with experience in water and wastewater systems. In the years 21, I've got a letter, I think it's on your site now, and you may have received it individually through CAT. That I don't know. On the community webpage. Anyway, through 2021 through 2023, there were bills that would remove DEC's regional engineers from the permitting process for municipal connections. I opposed that. That and other testimony led to Section 25 of Act 47 of 2023, which required the report that Brian mentioned. And I do provide a link in my letter to that report in case any of you haven't seen it yet and would like to look at it. The report found that the DEC WW permits, that's the code for the type of permits that are issued under Chapter 64, that it has benefits. The report recommended repeal full delegation authority, and I'm quoting from the report. Authority currently granted to the Agency of Natural Resources and modify existing partial delegation to provide authorizing language for proposed local technical review programs and creation of a general permit allowing qualified municipalities to conduct local technical review of water and wastewater systems. Connections without redundant state review while maintaining statewide consistency and accessibility of data and records. S212, as it passed the Senate, which is the bill you have before you, resolves many of the problems I had noted in the original bill, and these comments address issues that I think you would do well to look into before you pass S212 out of your committee. My comments all relate to sections of S212 that amend Chapter 64, which Brian mentioned to you. One of them is the general permit for connections to potable water supplies and wastewater systems. Brian might have answered this, and I'm not sure, but the Act 47 report recommends creating a general permit program only for qualifying municipalities. Section 3 of S212 requires A&R to develop a general permit for connections to potable water supplies or to wastewater systems. And this is done on page 4 in subdivision K1 of S212 as you have it. And what that language appears to do is to allow the general permit to be used for all connections, not just connections to municipal systems. And I think Brian answered that perhaps the intent is to allow it to be used for all systems, which is something I just learned this morning. So anyway, it's something to look into. What should be the breadth of the general permit? Chapter 64, as I mentioned, requires a permit for a connection to any potable water supply or wastewater system, meaning that the general permit appears to apply to connections to all potable water supplies or wastewater systems. And many of those systems are not municipal. They can be industrial, they can be state facilities, they're listed as other on the wastewater treatment systems. I've looked at that. I have not looked at corresponding for water systems, but I presume it's quite similar. There are many water systems for whom the general permit would apply, even though they're not municipal water systems. My recommendation would be to amend subdivision K1 to limit use of the general permit only to connections to municipal water and wastewater. And my letter provides a sample of how I think it might be worded. My next general area is additional general permits.
You just give us a why for the recommendation.
Pardon?
Why on your recommendation?
Oh, my recommendation would be to limit it to only the municipal permits as recommended by the report.
What's your concern?
My concern is that this started out as allowing municipalities, several years ago it started out as allowing municipalities the ability to issue connection permits outside of DEC. So my thinking is that is it is the area in which S212 should be focused. If you think it's okay to allow all those other systems to allow non-municipal systems to issue permits as well, that's your policy decision, which is what you hear a lot.
Eligible for a general permit.
Be eligible for a general permit.
That's not them. I mean, they're not issuing the permit. The permit still goes to A&R. It's a general permit, and then A&R actually would determine the anyway, how well that works. Efficacy of how.
Anyway, it's a point I raised for your,
I guess, but I'm just,
Consideration.
I really want to understand your concern, because this is, your concern is that they would exceed their capacity,
IBM has a discharge permit. You want IBM to allow
others to.
general permit to be used for connections within their own property or within their own property to their permitted system. I believe IBM, I won't say I believe, I don't remember whether IBM has a direct discharge permit on its own or whether it is required to discharge into one of the treatment systems in that area.
So you're thinking that there are privately held larger systems that could be, they could sell their capacity to someone else?
No, just that they would. My concern is that I think that's outside the original scope of the bill. And if you think that's a good expansion, you'll disregard my recommendation. My next comment has to do with the additional general permits section, which Brian mentioned. Section 3 of S212 authorizes A&R to adopt general permitting programs for other activities that require a permit under that section of statute that the secretary determines are low risk, low impact, and low complexity. The Senate committee did not spend much time on what it means to be low risk, low impact, and low complexity. That language was added on the morning that S212 was voted out of the Senate committee. A&R has 3 other general permits that I know of, and statute defines what should be going into those permits, what those permits should cover. I'm not aware of any other discretionary general permits that DEC has. My recommendation is that you explore what activities might be considered low risk, low impact, and low complexity, and decide whether you want to keep that language in the bill or remove it and not allow this discretionary authority for general permit. My next point is municipal capabilities to be eligible for delegation.
I'll go back to your,
Certainly.
a little breath between these points. Make sure I understand them.
Okay.
So which language was inserted toward the end? Just the low risk or the whole delegation authority?
That delegation authority was in there
Without any qualifier?
without any qualifications. And through testimony, it was decided to limit what the authority would be for those general permits. I do state that originally it was A&R was authorized to adopt general permitting programs for other activities that require a permit under Chapter 64. And so that could be any of the permits. And then at the last minute, this other language for low risk, low complexity, low, whatever the third one is, impact, was added. So without much discussion as to what really that means. Municipal capabilities to be eligible for delegation. S212 provides some guidance to A&R on delegating authority for local technical review to municipalities. Most of the qualifications for eligibility are left to A&R. S212 allows A&R to determine the qualifications needed to perform technical review, to establish other requirements for the delegation program, and the submission requirements of the delegation of the required documentation. I recommend that you consider adding some qualifications for the technical review, which might be listing the technical review and the duties of a position within the municipality. So it's clear who is doing that technical review and that the municipality understands the requirements. Requiring that the municipality is not under any orders to correct deficiencies in the systems. That the systems have the problems that, you have to complete this and this is the schedule, that kind of order. Or the qualifications needed for the submission requirements could include listing the coordination with A&R and the duties of the position, including applying for the general permit. I feel more comfortable with having, as an engineer, with having a little more guidance. Again, it's your choice as to how much you want to put onto ANR, of course, in terms of what they can do or some of the things they need to consider. Or you might consider this is more appropriate for the rulemaking process or the general permitting creation process. Yes. So my next point is capacity in the context of delegation of local technical review of connections. We've had several questions and discussion on what capacity is and what capacity means. And I believe there's an incongruity between section 4 on, I think it's page 8, and the technical manual on section 3 on page 4. Chapter 64, the language is that the municipality will only issue permits for water service lines, sanitary sewer service lines when there is adequate capacity in the public water system, wastewater treatment facility, or indirect discharge system. The report that will come out in the not the report, but the technical manual that will accompany the general permit talks about the definition. I'm trying to find where I had it. The term wastewater treatment facility typically excludes the collection system. And what my recommendation basically is that you adopt language from page 4 and put it into the requirements on page 8 so that it's using the same terms that it would use pollution abatement facility in both places, because I believe that to be more appropriate, and that it use potable water system in both places, especially if you're going to be expanding the definition of, or the use of the general permit to non-municipal systems. And I do have a suggestion on how to do that you would use the terms so that it would be, they would only issue permits for water service lines and sanitary sewer service lines and their connections when there is adequate capacity in the pollution abatement facility or public water system. And indirect discharge system would be redundant in that case because it's included in the definition of a pollution abatement facility. So those are my recommendations. Thank you for giving me the time to talk to you today and for giving me your attention.
Yeah, thanks for your testimony. Members have questions? Not seeing any. Thank you again.
Very welcome.
So much.
And I guess I'm going to put the agency on the spot a little and say, are you able to respond to these comments at this time?
For the record, Brian Redmond. So one of the first points that I would address would be this shift in the general permit authority for connections. It is true that the concept, and I alluded to this in my testimony, that the stakeholder group arrived at is slightly different than what we're proposing in S212, and it's reflective of the work that we did between last session and this session. So we are proposing to issue general permits for connections statewide. So that is just to be clear, that is the approach that we would be planning to take. The findings of the stakeholder group are really focused on this local technical review and sort of a delegation procedure. But within the context of addressing our housing needs and our housing shortage, we know that most municipalities rely on A&R for those services. So we would not expect a lot of participation in that program. It would be more limited. This is broader. And we expect that, again, as I testified earlier, to the creation of this design manual to bring those requirements forward, make them more accessible, improve them through this guidance manual is really the foundation for that general permit. And as I said, we would be relying on licensed designers and professional engineers who are required to do these projects. We would be using deference on their licensure to be able to complete the design of these projects. And on the back end, we would be auditing at some framework to be determined. So just want to be clear that that's the approach, that it is slightly different. We think it's a better approach. Again, internally, it helps us with our program sustainability. We feel that these are generally of lower complexity and that we can bring these requirements forward and actually improve the outcomes. The second point on the general permit and
Question before we move on, Representative Chapin.
Matt, sorry I came late, but I was listening to your testimony earlier. So just on that point, and looking about municipal owned systems versus privately owned systems, whether it's industrial or other kinds of privately owned systems. I think earlier you talked about one of the key pieces is around capacity and getting that letter from either the select board or the city council or operator of the wastewater. So if you're relying on this engineers and third-party engineers and these technical standards, but you were also talking about getting that letter, what would be the equivalent on a private system that you're using as general permit across?
we would be proposing to use the same process for the general permits across the board for both municipal and privately owned infrastructure. So it's different between water and wastewater. There's many more public drinking water systems than there are wastewater utilities in the state. I think there's 94 to 96 wastewater treatment facilities in the state. The vast majority of them are municipally owned. There are a few private discharging permits. Global is one of them. On the public drinking water side, there's 1,400 public water systems in the state. 400 of those are community water systems, and they have a diverse ownership structure. There's many more, I don't have the exact numbers offhand, but there's many more privately owned, think homeowners associations. There's a lot of those in the state. Also mobile manufactured housing communities, they're public water systems, sometimes privately owned. We have a few privately owned water utilities that are regulated by the PUC, probably around a dozen. I had to put a number to it right now and get exact numbers if there's interest. Many of those are the private water companies walk and talk like a municipality. Like think Woodstock Aqueduct Society. They serve the town of Woodstock. So there are examples out there of private drinking water systems that serve the town or the village. And our proposal is to really include and embrace this process to make it consistent across, again, all aimed at reducing administrative burden, reducing costs, and expediting the permitting process to deal with our housing issues.
Great added detail. My question was, what's the equivalent of getting a municipal wastewater?
Okay. Yes, sorry for
on the private side.
Yes, so it would be like in a homeowners association context, it would be their board, their HOA board. So it's whatever the governing body is. On drinking water utilities where the vast majority of these private entities reside, there is a formalized process to determine who is the designated contact, the owner, the designated operator. This is all done through very official means, mainly to make sure that our permits are enforceable.
Can you just, on the wastewater side with Global Boundaries, can you tell me what the entity would be?
That program does not reside under my purview, so I don't know who. I would need to follow up on that, which I can do.
I think that would be.
It looks like we have another question on this topic, and I know you have more.
Just wondering, who's responsible for the oversight of systems once they're implemented?
In terms of the connections? Or,
In terms of the, if they're failing, if there's a fail, I mean, how do we know if there's a failing system with these connections?
a failed, so you, under the chapter 1 rules, you need a permit to operate a failed system. And in terms of remedying,
When you need a,
in order to continue to use your water and wastewater system in a failed state, you technically need a permit from the state in order.
do you get it?
No.
Oh.
So that is where that is really the key aspect to our enforcement when it comes to on-site wastewater and water supplies, including connections. If it's backing up into the residence or the building, the business, that's a failure mode, as well as anything that's surfacing or direct discharging into a surface water. Those are the failure modes, and those are priorities for enforcement. I know you've all heard a lot about ARPA Healthy Homes and that initiative. That has been a very good program and focused on providing resources to Vermonters to improve their water and wastewater utilities, generally on-site septic or on-site water supply. And so that resource has been out there, but as the ARPA funds dry up, this is going to become another focus for us is finding failed systems again.
I think you had another point you were going to address.
It was the municipal versus private distinction. So I think that's covered.
So very high level, just so we go home with the right information. Summarize. I'm seeing two big, like, general permit buckets here for the committee. Can you just summarize both of those?
The first big bucket would be the general permit specific to connections. We're talking about statewide permitting for any connections permits that are issued, so water and wastewater. This may be done through a delegated municipality or at the state, kind of two different tracks here. Creating that pathway for municipalities, but also recognizing that the needs to make the process more efficient statewide. ANR would retain authority to, and this bill directs us to issue general permits for connections. So that's bucket number one. The foundational piece there is the design manual to bring that information, that technical resource forward. Our current wastewater rules are very septic focused. And so the connection standards are within those rules, and we want to extrapolate them out. One of the engineers that participated on our stakeholder group, great engineer, does a lot of water and wastewater work. I suggest you hear from them possibly. Worked in one of the communities in Montana, Bozeman, I believe, or one of the fast growing communities in Montana. And her recommendation was, if you're doing a water and wastewater connection in whatever town it is in Montana, here it is. Here's your guidelines, meet this specification. So everybody knew what the requirements are. And so that's where I feel like we can actually improve the outcomes here. So that's bucket number one. Bucket number two is the broader based general permitting authority under Chapter 64. As I testified earlier, we don't have any specific plans, but this is really important to us. Again, trying to shift those resources out of the middle of the process to the front and the back. And this would be done for low complexity, low impact. That language that was established in the Senate, what we would be doing is engaging our stakeholders in developing additional general permits. So that determination and those terms would be our metric that we would be working with stakeholders to define in the general permitting context. I think, a real low hanging fruit example would be the subdivision of land. That requires a WW permit to make sure that the land that's getting subdivided has suitable water and wastewater. So there's no construction involved. That could be a great example. There also may be very low risk, low complexity wastewater systems that I philosophically feel that we can move our limited resources just trying to keep up with 3,000 permits a year to the front and the back. And I think we can get better outcomes that way versus working in the middle. People know the state's going to correct their information if they submit it in a deficient manner. So there's this back and forth, and it's not efficient. And so what I'd like to do is try to pivot some of our resources to more on-site assistance on the front end, meeting with the engineers. That's training for them on our regulations, evaluating the site, looking at it, just in an effort to get improving the outcomes versus burying everybody in the middle. And I'm not saying we're doing this for all of our permits, but we would be looking at opportunities for lower complexity projects where we can make this shift happen.
What is the name of the engineer you recommended we hear from?
So the two that participated on the stakeholder group would be Andrea Day from Dufresne Group. She's the engineer. They both of these do a lot of water and wastewater work in the state. She's with Dufresne Group, one of the principals there. She was the one that worked in Montana. And then Craig Jewett with MSK Engineering out of Bennington. Craig also sits on our technical advisory committee, which is an advisory committee authorized under Chapter 64 to advise the secretary on water and wastewater issues. So he has that dual role. So he also would be a good, both very active in water and wastewater engineering work in Vermont.
Members have further questions? I guess I want further maybe thoughts or clarification on the terms low impact, low risk, low complexity. What does that mean to you? There's, we try to be specific in statute and those are a little vague.
I think that would be developed through the general permit process and would receive public comment and review via Chapter 170, the environmental notice bulletin. So the general permit would go out for review and comment. So that work hasn't happened yet. So I hesitate to give you examples. The subdivision of land example is one that comes to mind. There are certain types of wastewater systems that are very low complexity. There's no pretreatment. There's no hydrogeologic review. We know the soils are good. It's a basic in-ground system. They have a licensed engineer or licensed designer doing the design work. So that may be an opportunity for us to shift resources into spending more time in the field, looking at sites, working directly with consultants to get the projects approved. Again, it'll all be targeted. I know you like to be specific in statute, but it would be targeted at improving outcomes. Be one of the guiding goals.
Comes for whom?
For the landowner and the environment. Public health, environmental protection.
Other questions? Thanks so much for your testimony and joining us. Let's, we've been in here for an hour and a quarter. Let's take a break till 20 past the hour.